So thank you so much for being here with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Andrew. I'm a graduate student at MIT in the chemistry department. I went to Lexington High School and graduated in class in 2011. Um, and yeah, really happy to be talking with you guys.
Thank you. It is a pleasure having you on here today. And from what we do know about you, you were a dedicated MSEF participant for 2 years, and you've participated in the regional, state, and international science fair, which are great accomplishments. And speaking of your MSEF experience, could you talk more about your MSEF projects and what you learned from those experiences?
Sure. So my project kind of focused on a little bit of computational chemistry. So I've kind of always been really interested in chemistry. It's, my department in graduate school. It's what I majored in college. And I really wanted to use kind of computational tools to model potential inhibitors for viral infections. So there's a lot of investment by large companies to try to go after really popular, really, profitable diseases. There's obviously a lot of underrepresented opportunities to kind of make some inroads and help people out. So the goal was to kind of use some of those really big investments and focus on a different therapeutic area and try to make some sort of inroads. So that was the goal.
That's so cool. So would you mind talking a little bit about how you got from MSF to where you are now and like your educational journey and all that from that amazing project to everything you're doing now?
Sure. So like I mentioned, I graduated from Lexington in 2011. I then went to Emory and graduated in 2015. And then in 2016, started at MIT in the chemistry department. And I was, fortunate to have really good support structure, both, socially and scientifically. And over the course of my time in college, I worked in the lab of Professor John Snyder at Boston University, and he and his team kind of taught me all of the basics of being safe in chemistry, how to wear a lab coat, how to, dispose of waste, all of that. And then the year after my freshman year, I worked at a company called Cubist Pharmaceuticals, doing more kind of molecular dynamics research. And then once I kind of got towards the back nine of my college career, I basically spent all my summers in Atlanta working in the Leota lab, doing synthesis of drug candidates.
That's all very interesting. That's a very cool journey. And since you've been doing all these great things, being in labs, doing research, I wanted to ask you, could you give us an example of when something you learned from MSEF helped you with those things that you're doing right now, or your education, or your general career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I really took away from doing the science fair, and something that's really been a nice kind of jumping off point in my kind of career thus far, is the idea of being able to kind of form an idea, investigate it, and then critically communicate it. So that's something that is difficult to do, I think, in a classroom setting. Doing your own kind of independent research and then figuring out what the narrative is kind of behind why you're doing something and what you're doing, and really proving that what you're doing is thorough. And so that's something that obviously when you're doing a science fair project is really critical. You have to kind of communicate to the judges, this is what I did, this is why I did it. And that's the case kind of, going through independent research and being a researcher in college, in graduate school, and I would imagine beyond that. So that's something that I've come to appreciate and didn't necessarily think too much about when I was in the process of putting these projects together and making a poster board and coming up with a talk. So I'm definitely still learning, but I think I got a really good jumping off point from that.
Oh, that sounds great. So could you talk about what's it like to be in the career that you are now, and how did you find that you were interested and wanted to pursue that?
Sure. I guess I've always kind of had an interest in the sciences. My parents are both kind of involved in biotech and life sciences. Lexington and Emory had a really good kind of science oriented enthusiasm among its students. And I decided that like I said, during high school, wanted to work on a project that was kind of involved chemistry and molecular dynamics. And when I got to college, I realized I really wanted to try to make some of those compounds that I was kind of theorizing about, if not those compounds, compounds in general. And so I kind of spent a couple of years doing that. And then when I got to graduate school, I realized I wanted to kind of continue in kind of the medicinal research track that I was doing in undergrad, and am now kind of doing work looking at cancer biology, and still doing a little bit of chemistry here and there. So that's kind of the trajectory I went on.
Being in these fields, as you've just said, things like genomics, medical research and chemistry especially, I assume that there were many challenges that probably came along with them. So could you talk a little bit more about your challenges in these fields and in your educational journey in general, and how you've overcome them?
Sure. I first and foremost, been very fortunate to have really great peers and a really good support structure and mentorship structure from high school through graduate school. So I've always had like a really good, group of people to fall back on, and a lot of good advice going forward. I would say that the biggest kind of, obviously experiments fail 9 times out of 10. So that's always something you have to kind of dust yourself off and get back to it. And over time it can be difficult, but you have friends that kind of encourage you. And I'm again really fortunate to have a good kind of social structure at work that keeps us all engaged and excited. In terms of like big hurdles, the main thing that kind of comes to mind is my senior year, I ended up having I was diagnosed with a tumor in my knee that ended up needing to be taken out. And so it kind of obviously threw a wrench in my kind of plans for doing a senior thesis and doing some of this synthetic chemistry, since I couldn't walk. But like I said, my professor, Dr. Leota, and my kind of immediate mentors, Dr. Moore and Dr. Desari, were really supportive and kind of put me in a position to continue to be productive, even though I couldn't necessarily have my hands in the hood and walk around the lab. And that's something, the science fair, doing something that initially was so computationally kind of focused. I had a little bit of experience thinking about science and kind of organizing ideas and thoughts outside of a wet lab environment. So that was something that was really valuable, kind of going into this sort of year of slow research progress as a senior. And my professor was kind enough to keep me on for an extra year as a research technician to kind of tie up loose ends after I graduated. So.
Wow, that sounds really, yeah.
So sorry about that. I just wanted to say that was a really interesting story that you shared. Thank you so much for talking about your challenges.
Yeah, that's really inspiring that you kept going in that field and just didn't let it stop you. That's so cool. So another question about your career is like, what's your favorite thing about where you are now?
I really like the people I work with. The research is really interesting as well, but I think that, as I said, there's always kind of roadblocks that you run into. And I've found that having a really good team, that's one of the cool things that I found in graduate school, and the lab that I'm in, we work on really collaborative projects, and having really good teams and a lot of enthusiastic people make going in every day and doing sometimes some of the grunt work, or doing the really kind of cool discovery work is always really exciting. The work that I'm doing scientifically kind of focuses mostly on cancer biology and looking at how individual tumor cells can drive metastases or kind of tumor dynamics. And it's all very interesting and very exciting. And every day when you get kind of new data, it's something interesting and kind of makes you look at things in a different way. So that's awesome. But these being really interdisciplinary projects require teams that are really big, and being able to meet people that are experts in areas that I know nothing about is always a lot of fun. So that's probably my favorite thing about what I do now.
That sounds very cool. And so from where you are now, doing all these interesting things, do you have a specific advice that you would give to your high school self, or to yourself somewhere along the educational journey in the past?
Good question. I guess one of the things, as I kind of mentioned before, in doing the science fair, is to kind of think about the story you're trying to tell with your science, and the best ways to communicate that. I've been able to judge a couple of Massachusetts science fairs over the past couple of years, and I'm always really impressed with how the students kind of come up with their ideas and how well they communicate. Kind of their thought process and their results. And that was something that I didn't necessarily put as much thought into. A lot of times I thought I did the work, awesome, and I don't really need to, I can kind of wing it on the back end. And that's not really the best way to approach doing some of these things. So that would probably be my biggest piece of advice to my former self is you're not all the way there when the science is done or when the research is done. And the story that you tell can change a lot. And that's something I've learned in graduate school, really over the last year, in kind of finishing up my PhD. You'll do some work and people will say, well, what about that? And then you'll do a little bit more work, and the whole concept and the whole direction kind of changes based on suggestions that other people give. And so being able, again, to communicate what you're doing and receive feedback is something that I probably could have done better when I was younger.
Well, that's great advice. And so, also thinking back to that time in your life, like in high school, as many of our viewers are students entering the college application process and thinking about their futures, do you have any advice for students applying to colleges?
It's been a while since I applied to college, and I know it's quite a bit different. It's quite a bit different now, but it's really stressful in the moment from what I remember. But at the end of the day, you go to college or you go into the workforce or whatever it is, and it always turns out like it'll turn out fine wherever you end up, whatever you end up doing. I didn't get into all of the colleges I applied to. I was lucky to go to Emory. It was, my dream school. So I was very lucky in that sense. But it'll turn out fine. You'll meet really good people. You'll do really cool research, or you'll get involved in really good, social circles or, arts departments, things like that. So it's really stressful in the moment, but 1 year after you get your acceptance letter, you'll probably forget about all of that stress, and you'll, hopefully be in a really good environment. So same goes for applying to graduate school.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That was very inspiring and probably helpful for many of our viewers watching. And I just wanted to come back to your educational career, where you are right now. So from what we do know about you, you are currently pursuing a postdoc, or currently in that position. And I just wanted to ask you, what is that like? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it's essentially, in my particular case, I'm sort of continuing a little bit of the work that I was doing in my PhD. COVID has kind of thrown a wrench in everybody's plans. And so a lot of the research that's being done was kind of put on pause as things shut down. And so I transitioned to doing actually a little bit of COVID research, and I'm kind of circling back to some of the research that I had been doing before. As a postdoc. So it's in this case, it's a lot of kind of cancer research. In a lot of cases, it's kind of pairing RNA information from individual cells with DNA information from cells, and kind of trying to deconstruct the tumor environment and figure out, what are drugs doing when we model these tumors? Do they look good? Do they not look good? How do they change? So a lot of the work that I'm doing as a postdoc is still sort of in that cancer biology lane.
That's super interesting. I guess a question that I would have about that whole like cancer biology field is like, what do you think the future of like cancer treatment and medicine would be like with all of the research that's going on?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to preface by saying I'm not a medical doctor, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But a lot of what we're doing is sort of pairing. A lot of what we do is work with clinicians. As I said, these teams that I work on are really interdisciplinary. So we have clinicians that are kind of guiding some of the thought process behind understanding when somebody would be given X drug versus Y drug and what is kind of the response you would expect to see. So in that sense, we're doing some sort of kind of clinically related research. Hopefully we'll kind of get to a point where a lot of this personalized medicine is a little bit more realistic, or a little bit more broadly reaching. But the stuff that I'm doing is not going to change the world tomorrow. So it's really just kind of feeling out what works and how do these tumors change in response to therapies, and if we can model things really accurately, can we treat people with better drugs and not lower morbidity, lower mortality, things like that. So
The field of research you're in, as I'm hearing about it, it feels just so much like it's really magnificent, and I must say thank you for doing the work that you do. And I just wanted to ask you, do you have a favorite part of the scientific method through all the research that you've worked on?
favorite part of the scientific method? Ooh, I don't think I've ever gotten this question before. um, I think as I've a lot of these projects kind of take a while, so I'm kind of in some of these areas on sort of the back end, looking at the data and kind of drawing conclusions. So that's really interesting, and it kind of leads to a lot of springboarding into kind of new ideas and new directions. So kind of analyzing your results kind of right after doing some of that data collection is always really exciting. Like I said, you never really know what's going to, at least with the stuff that I'm doing, you don't necessarily know what the results are going to look like until you get them. And you kind of have to see how it fits into your hypothesis and be malleable and understand that, you're wrong a lot of the time. So that's probably my favorite part is seeing where ideas were right, where they were wrong, and kind of, use this information to point us in a direction as we go forward and think about other experiments to do.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for answering these questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed hearing about your experiences, about your educational journey. So thank you for taking the time out of your day for this interview. It really means a lot.